Yeah, just my take on things. My answer to number two. Guided discovery. Identifying, challenging your beliefs. Reframing your mind, negative thoughts release. Those cognitive distortions decrease until they cease. Let's go. Guided discovery. Identifying, challenging your beliefs.
All right, I think we're recording. Welcome back, everybody. This is Peplau's Ghost. I am thrilled to be joined with everyone. All of our hosts are here today. So excited. And also so excited for our first guest of 2026. I am unashamed to say that we really brought out the big guns for 2026. This is a huge name. I know he's shaking his head right now, and humility is always part of it. But this is a real leader in nursing, and especially psych mental health nursing. And so I'm real thrilled to introduce Dr. Hugh McKenna from the UK, also joined with our regular guest, our host, Dr. Sean Conboy, Dr. Kate Molino, and Dr. Melissa Chapman-Hayes. So, but like I said, Dr. Hugh McKenna is a world-renowned psych mental health nurse. If you haven't heard from him, shame on you. But I just read prior to this that he was nominated as, well, actually he won as one of the 70 most influential nurses in the past 70 years by the National Health System in the UK. So congratulations on that. Probably been awarded a long time ago, but he's also retired dean of nursing. I know we were just talking about that. We need more psych mental health nurses as deans of colleges in nursing, for sure. And that was at, I believe, Ulster University in the UK. And then he is triple fellowed in the American Academy of Nursing, the Royal College of Nursing, and the European Academy of Nursing Science. So again, big welcome to Dr. Hugh McKenna here on Peplau's Ghost. And so let's get right into it. I think, Hugh, we kind of invited you here, and I think you were very gracious to offer your time here on a Friday. So, I think we'll just get into really the big thing of, if you wouldn't mind sharing your thoughts as we have this podcast primarily, because we are all concerned about psych mental health nurses and nurse practitioners in the U.S. being kind of relegated to more kind of prescribing roles. Where do you see that landscape today? What is your concern? Just if you wouldn't mind just kind of starting us off on your experiences and your understanding of that role and where we're going.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and lovely to be here. Although I'm in the UK, I'm in Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK, and so I keep a foot in Ireland and also in the UK, so I'm familiar with what's going on in the UK, but I also do a lot of work in Scandinavia and in the Far East. I'm back and forth to Hong Kong quite a wee bit. I do some chairing over there. But so my view in terms of mental health nursing, as far as Europe is concerned, it's not in a good place, I'm afraid. What we're seeing is that there's a shortage of mental health nurses. So therefore, the government want to bring in more students into universities to study mental health nursing. That, you may say, is a good thing. But that also means that the people who teach mental health nursing are spending, because sometimes we're getting 2 intakes a year. So they're spending a lot of time involved in supporting those students. Because we're widening the net quite a lot to bring in students, some of them are not as bright as some others, so there's a lot of support required, a lot of pastoral care, and a lot of teaching. And here in the UK, we spend, it's a 3-year program, degree program, so we spend exactly 50% of that with students on placements and, practicums in hospitals, community areas. And during that time, the academic staff, the faculty have to go and visit them and obviously work with them. So that means that faculty don't have enough time to do research. Research is relegated to the evenings and weekends. And that has also had implications for PhD students. There are a lot of nurses who obviously are either doing a PhD or want to do a PhD. So there's a question over funding for that. But there's also a question over supervision, mentorship from established academics, because established academics may not have time to spend in such mentorship supervision. So that is an issue. And I wrote a couple of editorials recently on that. So there's also a view within government and some of the governments in Europe that actually we don't need a mental health nursing qualification. Let's have a generic qualification, a general nurse, and then afterwards they can specialize. So just to let you know what it's like here, we have 4 registrations for nurses, and they are completely separate. One is children's nursing, one is general nursing, or what we call adult nursing, one is what we call intellectual disability or learning disability nursing, and one is mental health nursing, psych nursing. And those are separate, and they are registered by our governing body and in other government bodies in Europe. So moving from that to a generic nurse, where mental health nursing is not a registered qualification, it's something you do afterwards at master's level, is causing quite a bit of consternation at the moment in the UK. So there's issues about research, there's issues about registration, and we're seeing more and more patients coming forward in communities, especially young patients, and they require a lot of time, and rightly so. And there's not as much interdisciplinary work as there should be. I believe firmly that the big problems facing humankind will not be solved by any one discipline. It's about different disciplines coming together and working together. So we are still in Europe educated separately. So doctors are educated separately from social workers, from what we call allied health professions, occupational therapists, etc., from nurses. But yet we work together when it comes to, day-to-day work in the community or in hospitals. So we want to encourage more interdisciplinarity. And that has been a bit of an upward struggle in this part of the world. So that's just, if you like, the context, very briefly. So I'm happy to delve into any of those, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you. And I know Sean's going to jump in here too. I mean, I think that speaks to where we are in the U.S. as well. I mean, as you're probably aware, undergraduate is a general nurse, and people will frequently say that all nurses are psych nurses, and some people, that riles people's feathers a little bit. So thank you for getting us started. Sean, I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, Dr. McKenna. So I like to
Please call me Hugh, Sean.
All right, I got you, Hugh. I'd like to think of psychiatric nursing as kind of this big genotype, right? And that they're all different phenotypic expressions of psychiatric nursing. For example, there's a European phenotype of psychiatric nursing, and there's probably a United States of America phenotype of psychiatric nursing. I'm going to ask you to think about this, kind of jump from one side of the pond to the other. Identify what are 2 things do you think that American expressions of psychiatric nursing can learn from Europe, and 2 things that Europe can likely learn from America.
Okay, I'm going to be controversial.
Sure.
Okay. If what was happening in the US at the moment in terms of undergraduate nursing, and indeed the question over research funding for nursing in the NIH, and indeed the threat that the doctor in nursing practice makes on the PhD, we would be out on the streets here. We would be I don't want to go too far, but we would be outside Parliament in not just hundreds, but thousands of people. So I think that's something that we can share. The other thing, I think we believe firmly that the PhD is the doctorate of choice for nursing. We tinkered some time ago with what we call professional doctorates, which were doctorates in nursing practice or doctors of nursing science, and universities started them. The first intake was full of enthusiastic clinical nurses, nurse administrators who wanted to do this, and then suddenly the second cohort or third cohort, smaller numbers, so the university stopped doing it, and it reverted back to the standard here is the PhD, where knowledge is generated, challenged, tested, as well as being taught. So I think I would like to perhaps get nurses on this side of the pond and nurses on that side of the pond talking about those particular issues. So that's what we could perhaps not teach you, but perhaps have a discussion with you about. In terms of the US, I think that as far as the US is concerned, I see a huge value in the US when it comes to academia. I see that you had theories, generations before we had on this sort of. Peplau was a case in point in 1952. We only started tinkering with this in the mid 90s. We had something else that I think that we could learn from is that if I took you back, Sean, to 1985 to 1995 in Europe, every academic paper you lifted in psych nursing was about nursing theories. It was about Peplau. It was about interactional theory, interpersonal theory. It was about how you could apply theories in practice. It's about how you could underpin your curriculum with theories. It could be how you perhaps could underpin your research with theoretical frameworks. That's all gone. Nobody talks about theories now. Nobody teaches theories in schools of psych nursing now or in general nursing. So I think from what I'm getting from Jacqueline Fawcett and what I'm getting from some other people is that that's alive and well in the US. Maybe I've got that wrong, but that's something that you could obviously teach us. I also think in the US, you are perhaps more interdisciplinary than we are. On this call, for example, you have a psychologist. I have attended over 100 webinars in psych nursing in this part of the world that were all full of psych nurses. There was no non-nurses there. So I think I touched on earlier on the importance of interdisciplinarity. I think we can learn from that. So those are two things that I think we could learn from. The other thing I think you could learn from us, if you don't mind me go on a little bit, is more global viewpoint. It's as if the US is you're doing fantastic work, but very insular. So I was speaking to the editor-in-chief of Nursing Research a few years back, Molly Doherty, and I said, how many people do you have from other countries on your editorial board? She says, no, they're all US people. What? So I think, and I read somewhere recently where 11% of the US population have a passport. I can get a reference for that if you want. Whereas here, it's close to 95% have passports. So I think we could perhaps bring that more global outlook to US psych nursing. But there's a lot that we can learn from you. Sorry to go on, Sean.
No, actually, this was really helpful. I agree with you that America is very much Aristotelian in its thinking. It thinks it's the center of the universe and it needs to get over itself. So thanks, Kate.
So, our next question for you, Hugh, you mentioned Peplau. Obviously, you know that the title of this podcast is Peplau's Ghost. And we called it that because, we are really focused on the importance of the interpersonal relationship in our work. And so, you're mentioning all of these pressures that I think psych nursing is facing globally in terms of time and, restrictions on scope and things like that. In your opinion, do you think that the Peplau model is still a realistic way to practice? Or is this, something that is no longer really feasible based on the structures we are working within?
Part of me, thank you for that question, Kate. Part of me thinks that nursing has changed a lot since 1952, when Peplau first spoke about her interpersonal and the work she did based on Harry Stack Sullivan and Abraham Maslow. Healthcare has moved on considerably, and so has nursing. But every day I said here in this part of the world, we don't teach Peplau any longer. 20 or 30 years ago, if you threw a stone at a psychiatric hospital or clinical setting, they would be using Peplau. And she was here, I met her. And she had a huge influence on this side of the Atlantic. Today, that's gone. And when we teach nurses 3-year program, undergraduate, BSc, there's no theory as far as I can see. There's very little, there's a lot of content. It's packed with content, but I'm not too sure how many interventions would be based on Peplau's work. But I knew I was speaking about this today, so I revisited Peplau. I didn't have to because she's close to my heart. But a lot of the stuff she was talking about, the other thing that we don't do well here and we need to do more of is prevention. And I was looking at Peplau's work, and Peplau said very clearly the importance of prevention. And she talked about that curative interventions, we know they've come before prevention, but she talked about we can instill in individuals growth and development so that they can they can help themselves grow, help themselves develop in terms of healthcare. So that's a biggie for me as far as Peplau is concerned, because you're never going to have enough. I don't know what it's like in the US, but you're never going to have enough therapists here. I had a meeting yesterday where we were talking about young people who are unwell, and there's a huge waiting list. And each of those young people need about 8 different therapy sessions. And they're on a waiting list probably 2 years before they get there. So we're not going to have enough psych nurse therapists. We're not going to have enough psychologists. We don't have enough at the moment. We don't have enough psychiatrists at the moment. And this tells me, if I needed reminding, this tells me that we have to look towards prevention. And I'm very taken with George Albee's work in University of Vermont in mental health, who said that no disease affecting humankind has ever been eradicated by treating people with that particular disease. It's about prevention. And he did some really good work on mental health in the University of Vermont. So Peplau was strong on that. The other thing she was strong on, which we're big at in the moment in Europe, is co-production. We're talking about we have to work with people in terms of planning their care, evaluating their care, getting their input on how do we design our services. And they call it co-production over here. Some people call it co-design. Peplau was talking about that before anyone else. She was talking about working with individuals, working with them together to identify what their problem, their felt needs were, and identifying interventions with them so that they could take, if you like, control themselves and work through health. So that was something that Peplau talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, jump in and just real quick.
I tend to go on.
No, it's good. And I'm stepping on Melissa's toe too, so I apologize. But I don't want to let it go that you had met Hildegard Peplau. And so if you wouldn't mind sharing what that experience was like and, kind of what surrounded that, maybe how that impacted your life.
Yeah, well, we ran a conference in Ulster University back about sometime in the mid-'80s to... I would probably say late 80s, early 90s, and Hilda was the speaker, and she came and I met her. We went out for lunch. We had dinner that evening, but when she did her presentation on her view of nursing, you could hear a pin drop in the room. There was maybe 400 people in the auditorium, and what I noticed very early on is that she made the complex simple, or should I say, made it understandable. So we had the people who were giving out the coffee, the people who are working to support, like the security staff and the staff who were there to help with the catering. They thought she was marvelous because they were standing there in the auditorium listening to her and they could understand everything she was saying. They could understand the importance of what she was saying about interpersonal interactions and interpersonal relationships. And I said, that's quite a gift. I can speak at lots of conferences, and what I do is I speak to other psych nurses, and we write for other psych nurses, and maybe we forget that we need to get our message through to patients, families, and communities. She did that. So that was my lasting impression of her. She was not a woman to be crossed. I mean, I think she had a core of steel, which she didn't show very often, but I could tell that if she had to stand up and be counted, and I think today, if she was alive today, she would have something very important to say to what's going on with nursing generally and psych nursing and perhaps health, not just in the US, but elsewhere.
Thank you for that. It's actually a pretty nice transition into talking a little bit about the balance between following evidence-based practice, sometimes to the point of religiously, and sort of the art of the clinical aspect, right? Psychotherapy is kind of messy and it takes both. And I also want to note, as the non-nurse, I think this gold standard trap crosses disciplines as well. So I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on, do you think we've become too obsessed with rigid metrics and lost the art of that clinical gut feeling?
You said the gold standard. What did you say about gold standard?
Evidence-based practice.
Oh, yes. Okay. Thank you for that question, Melissa. A very important question. I think that when I remember I was a student psych nurse, there was a nurse manager, what we call a nursing sister in the ward. And when we went in to have the report in an office from the night staff before they went off, she didn't come to the report. She went and she sat on each and talked to each patient. Just sat down and had a conversation with them. When the report was over, a half an hour later, she knew more about what went on than us. And she had this intuitive nature to her. She didn't have a degree. She wasn't highly qualified when it comes to various qualifications, but she had an intuitive understanding of mental health nursing and mental health problems. So she sometimes would say to me, Hugh, could you spend some time with Joe, patient? I think he's going through a bad patch. And maybe later on that day, Joe would do something, self-harm, or Joe would, become very unwell. And I went to her and I said, how did you know that was going to happen? And she said, I just knew. She wasn't able to say, here is the theory, here is the evidence, here is the research that said this would happen. It's just, I knew. She knew her patients, she knew their families, she knew their behavior, and she was able to work very closely with them intuitively. So I detect what you're saying is that maybe we've lost some of that. And I would take it a little bit further, if I may. On this side of the Atlantic, we got over enthusiastic about evidence-based practice or evidence-informed practice. But we didn't take it a step further. I'll explain that by the following. If you take the research continuum, as I see it, and it's not necessarily linear. So you start with research, dissemination. We're really good in nursing, in psych nursing and in psychology on doing research and disseminating through publications and our conference presentations. The next stage is uptake, ensuring that your findings are taken up by clinicians or by managers or by whoever, policymakers, for example. The next stage is implementation. And the next stage after that is impact. So I think we're very good at doing research. We're very good at disseminating. We're not terribly good at ensuring that our research is taken up by clinicians and policymakers. And even though it's taken up by them, we have to go that stage further and say, have they actually implemented something? Have they changed policy? Have they changed practice? That implementation. And even after that, you ask yourself the final question, what was the impact of that? What was the benefit? What changed? What was the effect of that? And I think evidence-based practice only went as far as implementation. So we got the research, we got the dissemination, there might have been uptake in terms of evidence, but we didn't actually take it a step further to impact. And if you look at all the definitions, of which there are hundreds on evidence-based practice, that's exactly what it is. It's about practice. It's not about outcomes. It's about using research to help you do something, intervene. But what's the end product of that? What is the result of that? So I think we have bringing that back to the clinical area, because you can't have impact without clinicians being involved in helping you implement the findings and achieve the benefit, the impact. And I think that's crucial. And I think that maybe psych nurses have lost it. I'm not sure what it's like in your part of the world in psychology or in psych nursing, but on this side of the Atlantic, mental health nursing faculty never go into the clinic. They could be 30 years in university teaching the future psych nurses, but yet the last time they seen a patient was maybe 30 years ago. Where's the credibility? And they're able to roll off evidence-based practice, they're able to roll off the latest research findings, etc. So I think we've a problem there.
I really appreciate all those points and the example of the individual with a strong intuition and time with patients. Thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Hugh. I mean, my only question is, how do you teach that in a sense? Because I think that's somewhat of an innate maybe, but I think we can mentor that, right? We can, but you're right. It's not emphasized enough. There's not good leadership in that sort of way. But yeah, a lot of things you said have really impacted me. I mean, that idea of, sorry, please.
Sorry, Daniel. Just
No,
the point you made. Your point you made reminded me of Benner's work from novice to expert. The expert had used intuitiveness. The expert was able to see the big picture. And I think we need to encourage more of that. Sorry for interrupting you, Daniel.
No, that's good. I think that's, yeah. And again, I think you've said over and over again that, in the UK, you see theory kind of disappearing. And I think, and I'll speak to the US, I mean, I think there are pockets. There are definitely colleges, universities that have that, but I will speak to where I am at. It is a desert, theory desert. And unfortunately, I think, like you said, a lot of times it's almost, seen as not needed. And so a lot of things aren't even justified through a theoretical framework. So I appreciate your perspective on that. And that uptick, that translational, I mean, that's, again, just all kind of hitting home for me. So I guess maybe to kind of, as kind of almost a wrap up kind of question is maybe looking towards the future, as we like to try to do here in our last question is, where do you see the future of psych mental health nursing? And maybe let's try to see optimistically, like, in 5 years, if, God willing, this podcast is still running and we have you back, it's what happened in the last 5 years that you'd be inspired by, or that you were hopeful would happen and it actually happened. So what are you hopeful for at this point?
I'm hopeful for more leaders. We have a shortage of leaders. Some psych nurses who were born leaders, and I knew them and you knew them, Daniel. In this part of the world, they became staff nurses, then they became board managers, then became administrators or went into the college. And after 20 or 30 years, their leadership, yes, with students, but where was their leadership nationally or internationally? Where is the Peplows of, where's the Peplows today that people will queue up, will travel across the Atlantic to go and listen to and hear? We have them. There's some of them there, but we don't have enough of them. And I think that we need to fast track in the next. My view is everything's down to leaders. When I mentioned to Melissa, that ward manager who had that intuitive, she was a leader. She didn't have to broadcast it. She was a leader. Everyone knew she was a leader because of her behavior, because of her knowledge, because of her skills. We need to fast track future leaders in psych nursing, and we need to get them round the table, not outside the door, not under the table. They need to be round the decision-making table. I don't know what it's like in the US, but when you have a large hospital or when you have a large organization, health organization, you want a nurse around that table. We can learn a lesson from somebody in this side of the Atlantic. It was Florence Nightingale. She walked the corridors of power. She was able to have coffee with Queen Victoria, or tea in that time, a couple of times a week. Politicians were able to ensure that she got funding for the first the first nursing hospital, St. Thomas's Hospital in London. And so we need that power. We need to, and I'm not sure that the big nursing bodies that exist worldwide at the moment are staffed by the right people. We need people who are able to say the emperor has no clothes. We need people who are able to lead, who students and future practitioners and future academics and faculty can look to and get leadership from. And we don't have enough of those people. So I would say the one thing that I would like in the next few years is identify blossoming leaders early and fast track them into positions where they're able to lead.
Hugh, I want to share real quick with you. You mentioned earlier that your interactions with Dr. Peplau had you saying that she is a woman not to be crossed. I think that was the words you used. I just want to share with you that I have an old friend who was a professor of mine from decades ago who also had the chance to meet Dr. Peplau. And I asked her that question. I said, what was she like? And her exact words, I'll never forget. She said, she wasn't a mean person, but I wouldn't cross her. So decades later, there's internal consistency between her view and your view.
Definitely, I would use the same sentence to describe her, and maybe we need more nurses like that, Sean.
Yes.
Yeah, who are able to hold their position when it comes to getting more resources for nursing and supporting nurses and developing nursing and growing nursing. We need more people like Peplau. And so anything we can do to increase the number of modern contemporary Peplaus, count me in.
I love it. Well, that'll do it for this episode. Thank you again for Hugh, Dr. Hugh McKenna. Thank you again. This has been an absolute pleasure of mine. I think everybody here on this call is going to say the same thing. This is going to carry me through the weekend and the next week as well. So thank you again for your insights and just kind of sharing your perspectives. And I think that call at the end, if you're listening to this right now and you're inspired, please call, reach out to us. Put a comment, subscribe to the podcast. We'd love to have you on. We'd love to have that conversation further. So let's have this kind of maybe light a fire a little bit under somebody. So thank you so much. Appreciate that again, and look forward to many more episodes coming in 2026 for Peplau's Ghost.
Too much seasoning. They feel it, therefore it's true. Work hard until those thoughts are finally leaving, so you can be you. They feel it, therefore it's true. Work hard until those thoughts are finally leaving, so you can be you. Guided discovery. Identifying, challenging your beliefs. Reframing your mind, negative thoughts release. Let it go. These cognitive distortions decrease until they cease. Yeah, guided discovery. Identifying, challenging your beliefs. Reframing your mind, negative thoughts release. Let it go. These cognitive distortions decrease until they cease.